To be or not to be, that is the question. That's the most famous line from all of Shakespeare's works, the most often quoted. It's the most famous of the soliloquies, also known as the nunnery scene. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive, breaking that speech line by line apart, because when you understand it, it reveals one of the most central emotions and dilemmas that govern your life and decisions from day to day. Now, whether you are new to Shakespeare or whether you think you're not into Shakespeare, if you're studying for exams in high school or college or university, or even if you're a teacher, there is something in this video for you, I promise. It is one of the most worthwhile bits of writing that you can ever look at. There's more contained in these 34 lines than in books and books and books of thought on life. So without further ado, let's start digging in to this most famous of speeches. Now, before we go into this speech, we have to recognise something about it. It's quite enigmatic in places. It seems like it could be interpreted in more than one way. Now, you probably have already heard the main interpretation, which is that Hamlet is thinking about whether he should live or, take his own life. And that is what he's thinking. That is sort of what he's talking about. This is how the words apply to him. But Shakespeare, as ever, is interested in the human condition. This is not just the staccato sound of speech as you try to explain something quickly. This is the fugue of inwardness, riding on the bourdon note of reason, as we become aware of life right in front of us and become conscious of our place in it and what our actions mean or don't mean. And that is something which there's a principle in this that branches out beyond just to live or die. So just keep that in mind. As we go through this, we're going to look at mainly what Hamlet himself is saying about his own feelings in this moment, but we'll tease out some parts which, definitely have a greater meaning than just that. So, our scene, we've got the king, Polonius, the queen, Ophelia, Rosencrantz. They've all been in the room. Now, Ophelia remains in the room, but the others leave, and Polonius and the king get in like a closet because they're spying on Hamlet because he's been behaving pretty weird for most of Act 2. And they think that maybe he's mad. Of course, Hamlet himself, we know, has already seen the ghost of his father. And his father has explained how his uncle has killed him while he was asleep under a tree because he was having an adulterous affair with the queen. And Hamlet has been trapped on this horns of dilemma. Do I do something or don't I do something? Do I take vengeance for my father, which is what he wants? But for some reason, he's held back. Indecision is the great hamartia of Hamlet. Hamartia is the thing that causes his downfall. And I just want to say here that I have had a commenter, and quite a valid comment, say that he's not indecisive because this play takes, a couple of days to get through. And so he says, well, from the time of finding out about his father's death and acting, that's a short span, he's not indecisive. Logically, that's true, but indecision is the key point with Hamlet because Shakespeare's following the pattern of the Greek tragedies. Now, in the Greek tragedy, you had a theatre and a blanket as a backdrop, as Coleridge said about Shakespeare. And he had to encapsulate everything. So the Greeks had this idea of unity between time and place and action. That to keep the audience engaged, you had to condense everything artificially. And the audience would fill in the rest. The audience would know that this could be stretched out. But trying to stretch things out a lot on stage, very difficult. Even Macbeth, the real Macbeth, King of Scotland, reigned, it was somewhere between 14 and 17 years. But when you read it and go through it, it's like it happens in less than a month. The speed at which it moves, there is a unity of time, place and action. That's not essential. So it is indecision by Hamlet, even though, if strictly speaking, it happens in a few days. So having said all of that, we're going to now break down the play and really stick with this. Get a coffee, save this, bookmark this play, this video if you can't get through it all now, because what you're about to hear from Shakespeare is so relevant to your life, to everyone's life, as we will find in the very first line. So here we have Hamlet comes in and begins to talk out his own thoughts. Again, we don't know if Ophelia actually hears him. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. The most famous passage in all of Shakespeare. This is fantastic. Let's first look at the phrase to be or not to be. What does he mean? Specifically for Hamlet, he's talking about to live or not live. To be, to exist, or not to exist. That's his question. Because he is trapped in misery at the minute. He knows what's happened to his father. He knows that the current king has murdered his father and took his place as king. He knows that he was having, this horrible adulterous relationship with his mother, and he feels it's almost incestuous that they've got married after the king's died. But he can't seem to do anything. He can't summon or muster the bravery. So is it better to be alive or dead in that situation? Now, I just want to make a comment regarding understanding Shakespeare and some of the trickeries involved in the next bit. That is the question. Now, how do you read that? To be or not to be, that is the question, is the usual way you'll hear it. But if you look at the actual meter, the iambic pentameter in the line, we have a little bit of a curiosity here. If you want to understand iambic pentameter, by the way, which is so valuable, it will help you love Shakespeare, go and watch my video on the lesson on iambic pentameter. It's half an hour long and it will really give you an understanding of how iambic pentameter works on us as people. I'll leave that in the description or on the end screen for you to click. Now, let's just look at the first line. To be or not to be. Well, be is emphasized here. That would break the iambic pentameter if you emphasize that. In fact, iambic pentameter would suggest is where you put the stress. So let's see how that changes the line. To be or not to be. That is the question. Now that's just raised it. It's not like that, if you stressed it, would be saying, highlighting to be or not to be. That statement is the question, okay? But to say to be or not to be, that is the question. Makes this imminent, meaningful moment for Hamlet. It means he's actually going to be considering whether I should stay alive or die, considering his current circumstances. Now, actually, without going too far, you could stress the on that line. That is the question. Now that would open it up to all of humanity. Now, is it worth living or not? Is there meaning in life or not? Do you see how just looking at the stresses could make a difference? So the higher level you're studying this at, the more you'll want to take note of just how an actor might want to stress those points. And you are allowed to break the iambic pentameter. It's the framework of blank verse. It doesn't have to be a complete rule. Now, he now expounds on the question. Why is there a question about whether you should live or whether it's better to die? He says, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. We'll stop there. Whether it's nobler in the mind, nobility, honour, is so deeply ingrained in us. Is it more noble when your life is hard to just stand and face the slings and arrows? By slings, he means the slingshot. So the missiles of life. He's particularly talking about outrageous fortune. What is that? Bad luck, mischance, time and unforeseen occurrences. Life deals us all a bad hand at times. Overall, you think of the famous old phrase, which Shakespeare's frequently got allusions to the Bible. I think it's the book of Job where it says that man's days are short and glutted with trouble. In other words, full of problems. Now, he's saying outrageous fortune. The word outrageous means to be against what is acceptable, be against what is expected and the standard. You know, if you think of someone behaving outrageously, you know, it raises our ire, our anger, because they're not doing what is right. Well, fortune, not the goddess here, but fortune just meaning circumstances of life, is outrageous to us all. It throws us some of the worst stuff. You know, if you lose someone in life. By the way, Shakespeare lost his son Hamlet, whom Hamlet is named after, when his son was 11 years old. Was this Shakespeare's own feelings of those times that he's thinking, is it worth carrying on when outrageous fortune throws slings and arrows? But Hamlet is talking about, is it noble to just acquiesce, to just take it? You know, because he's not actively warring against it. It's one thing to stand up and say, I will bear the brunt of, you know, outrageous fortune. I will tackle it. He's saying, is it nobler in mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? Because he's had a bad hand with what's happened with his dad and his mum and everything else in House and All Castle. You know, but he's just sat there taking it and he feels miserable. Is that noble? Then the question follows, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. So here we have this great metaphor. We've had a metaphor already, slings and arrows, but now the outrageous fortune is like a sea of troubles. It's not just the odd thing here and there. It's not just the peppering of arrows and slings which can take you down. This is a sea of troubles, wave after wave, this heavy body of movement against you. In fact, that tells you this is unstoppable. However, look at the attitude. Take arms against the sea of troubles. Imagine, you know, you've got a horde coming towards you and you're on your own, but instead of turning and running, instead of just resigning to the arrows coming down, you pick up your shield, you pick up your sword, and you head out into that swelling torrent of people coming towards you. You'll eventually die, but is that more noble than just sitting there and taking it? And it says, and by opposing, end them. So by fighting against the problems which really crush us, maybe we break through. Is that better? Or is it so futile because it's a sea of troubles? Imagine a knight trying to take on the sea. Slash all you like with your sword, you're not going to do anything. So is that really noble? And if we're going to die anyway, is it really worth the time to fight against it? That's all that's coming up. But the nobility, the word noble really challenges us within. We like the idea of fighting against something, but is it actually more noble to just sit back and take it? Interestingly, he does say about the sea of troubles, by opposing, end them. Now, this is where there's an enigma in the speech, one of the enigmas. Hamlet himself, what does he mean when he talks about ending the sea of troubles? Well, he said at the beginning, to be, to live, to exist, or not to be. I've got all these things coming at me. I could just sit and let them pelt me and stab me and pepper me with arrows and sting me and do nothing, just resign to it. That's the most noble thing, to stay alive, because of course suicide is thought of as a way out, a coward's way out, but it's like, so I just nobly sit here and be battered. Or he could take arms, maybe a dagger, as we'll see later, and end the troubles by taking his own life. Would that actually, when you think about it, although people say it's the coward's way, would that be better? That's the question Hamlet's asking. And of course, it's not the better option, by the way, in genuine life. No matter how low you feel, just hang on. Everyone feels that way at some point. I just want to point that out. But if you're ever feeling that low, talk to someone, because life has many joys. However, we are getting a deep inward look from Hamlet at sometimes how we as humans feel. And he is asking a serious question about existence and meaning ultimately in life. So, he's got that question. Now he's thinking about dying to end his trouble, the pain. Let's read what he says next. To die. To sleep. No more. And by a sleep, to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. This such profound thinking, and like I say, do you notice it's got that harmony, that lyricism about it, which comes from deep within the soul. It's not just choppy words. So what's he saying? First of all, he opens his mind to us and tells us that what he's thinking about and is appealing to him is to die. And then he uses metonymy, a word that is similar to or could be relatable to death, to sleep. What I like about the phrase to sleep, have you ever been so low, so stressed, so worn out by your constant thoughts or the troubles that you're going through that you just want to go to sleep to have a break from them? Okay. Well, what he's saying is to die. Oh, it'd be like to sleep. And then he says, no more. Non-existent. No problems. No pain. What's interesting here is he may be aware of the book of Ecclesiastes, where it talks about the dead are conscious of nothing. They have no work, nor rest, nor enjoyment. They're just no more. And that to Hamlet seems to be somewhat appealing right now, because the pain is so much for him. I didn't read it brilliantly the first time, but let's just look at what he says next. By a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. That's how more it should be said. So he's saying when we sleep, what I mean is to say the heartache, the thousand natural shocks. Thousand, many, infinite number. Natural, coming from life, not artificial, just life deals us terrible things, and he's going to mention a few in a moment. Shocks, not like making you jump, but unexpected events, not just that. Shock also has the sense of a body blow, okay? So if you're hit really hard, that is a shock, okay? So the thousand blows of life, to sleep and be relieved from the heartache and the pain, the mental tumult, which is really Hamlet's problem. His mind is in a right state. To sleep no more. He actually says, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. Consummation, you often think of marriage for consummation. Marriage is a binding contract. And to consummate something means to ratify it, means to sign off on it, to make it legally binding. And it guarantees you whatever you've signed on for. So he's saying to sleep or to die, to be no more, to end the heartache and all these natural shocks that come upon us in life, that's a contract to be devoutly wished for. Is there anything better than to be done with the pains of life? That's how Hamlet is feeling right now. And he's actually looking, Shakespeare, broader to humanity when he thinks of the run of life and the troubles we go through. Wouldn't it be better just to be, not be? Or would it be better to be anyway? To be or not to be? That is the question for all of us. See where the stress on is comes in. Just to say, in case you're wondering, when he says 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. Flesh, humans, heir means your inheritance. So when you are born, you will inherit all the bad luck of the world, okay? It is a natural thing for outrageous fortune to come hunting for you. Everyone has it. And a good thing about that is it tells us we're never alone. When we read Shakespeare's words, we see that through all history, people have felt really low, okay? You don't have to read his comedies to know that he found life worth living himself. Okay, but now he carries on. He's already talked about to die, to sleep no more. And then he says again, because it's deeply in his mind, he's really musing it over this. He's become deeply aware of his human place. He's become aware of his infinitesimally small dot in time compared to everything. He says, to die, to sleep. Okay, now it's quicker there. To die, to sleep. Oh, it's appealing to sleep, to be free from it all. But then look at this next bit. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. We'll stop there. This is phenomenal. He says to die, to sleep. That sounds good. And then he says, carrying on a thought, to sleep, perchance to dream. I just point out here, if you're making notes, this is called, what is it called? Anadiplosis, I think is the word. You don't see it very often. This is where, it says to die, to sleep, and then he starts the next bit, to sleep. So when you end a line and then begin the line with the same words, to sleep, that's called anadiplosis, I believe. Double check, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But he says to sleep, perchance to dream. Notice the carrying on of thought, this awareness. And then it's the dream that becomes a problem because he says, aye, there's the rub. When you say there's the rub, that's the point. That's normally the sticking point. So if you imagine running your hand, stroking something, maybe it's a desk, an old desk with like a velvet top, but a patch of the velvet has come off. So you're stroking it and then you come to the bit without velvet and what happens? You rub, okay? There's the grit in the wheel. There's the thing that holds us up. What is? That if we go to sleep to escape all of our troubles, we may perchance, maybe in other words, dream. So actually, remember he said to die, to sleep no more. But what happens if it's to die, to sleep, to dream? And you're not no more, but something else comes. The dreams in sleep. When you're asleep, you normally think of yourself as being unconscious, but sometimes we can have fitful dreams. And he says, there's the problem. Because to him right now, it seems so simple that to not be would be the correct place. He'd be happier there rather than struggling to be, to exist and have to face all of the torment that's in his mind and in his situation. Now let's see why he says that's the rub. And he opens this from himself to all of us. He says, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. There's so much in this. On the face of it, you might think, I don't follow. This is actually, there is a little bit of a knotty phrase in here, but we'll pull that apart. What he's saying, in that sleep of death, so if we do die and we go to sleep, and why does he want it to be? No more. So we get the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks are gone, all pain is gone. He says, in that sleep of death, what dreams may come? In other words, there may be a consciousness when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. When we shuffle off this mortal coil, when it says mortal coil, we're talking about the stresses of life. When we shuffle off, when we fall off the mortal coil. Now, the phrase coil can have multiple meanings, has had multiple meanings through time, but in Shakespeare's day, one of the common uses of the word coil was rings, circles. You know, in today's life, we talk about living the rat race. We go round and round doing the same. We go to sleep, we get up, we have breakfast, we go to work, we come home, we deal with the family, we go to sleep, we get up, we go to work to make money, we come home, we pay our taxes, we go to sleep, we get up, we go to work, round and round and round and round. And we're mortal. That coil doesn't go anywhere. That ring doesn't go anywhere. And eventually you die. You shuffle off. And that's an interesting word, shuffle. Does that sound like someone who is taking arms against a sea of troubles? No, normally it makes you think of an old man shuffling along on the coil, the ring, the endless circle monotony that we call life. Shuffle off the mortal coil. Now, I just make one little comment here. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great philosopher, had an idea that shuffle wasn't the word Shakespeare originally used. Now, there's no grounds to back him up on this, but it's an interesting observation, thinking of how often Shakespeare likes to use metaphor analogy. Schopenhauer thought it should be shuttle, to shuttle off this mortal coil. Now, we're not talking rockets, of course. The shuttle was a weaver's instrument. When you're weaving, you have the loom in front of you with all the strands this way, and then you weave strands horizontally. You use a shuttle to do it. But Schopenhauer's thinking, did Shakespeare mean that the thread of our life, which is on a coil, like a cotton reel, the shuttle moves along, slowly unraveling it back and forth. But the idea is still monotonous, and eventually our thread of life comes to an end. Yeah, so we shuttle off the mortal coil. You imagine we're pulling on the thread until it comes off the coil completely and floats away in the air. Interesting idea, but the idea is the same. We are mortal, we just have this monotonous life and then go. But his problem is, what happens if we come off our life and then instead of nothing, what dreams may be beyond that? In other words, what is in the afterlife? What awaits for us? Is it truly nothing? And he says, that's the problem. Now look at the next words. He says, that must give us pause. He's not lecturing, saying, that must give us pause, everyone. Must give us pause. He's talking to himself. He's just thinking, well, that's what causes all of us to halt. We may think about ending it all to get out of pain, but we halt because it's like, well, what's next? We're not sure. And then he makes this interesting comment, there's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Now, this is a line that's confused lots of people. So we're going to break this up. There's the respect. When he says there's the respect, there's the point that what happens after we die. That's the point that makes calamity of so long life. How do you read that line, that makes calamity of so long life? Most people instinctively or feel that it's this fear of what comes next, what dreams may come, that makes a calamity of us living so long. But that doesn't seem to make sense. It makes calamity of so long life. We have a long life and it's a calamity because afterwards we don't know what comes. But he's not talking about that. He's talking about we would end it. It seems easier and better, more noble to end it rather than fight against a sea of troubles you can't beat and not have pain. But what happens if afterwards there is something and we don't know what that is? That causes us to think twice. So he's not talking about us having a long life here because he's been talking about ending it. What we need to do, when we read it that way, we're actually reading it in our mind as that makes calamity of so long a life, as if we have a long life. That's not what he says. The long life is referring to calamity. That makes calamity of so long life. In other words, that's why calamity lasts for us. That's why we have so much calamity, because we stay alive. And calamity then has a long life to act upon us. And we stay alive because we're too scared to end it because we don't know what dreams may come. Because what can be in dreams? Nightmares. And that's the big worry. Of course, we're talking Shakespeare's age, a very religious age. You've got the Protestants, the Catholics, you've got the thought of hellfire, all that kind of stuff, which means we then decide to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune because, well, we'll see that now. Let's go on with what he has to say. He says, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time? The oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. Ah, what's he saying? He's saying the reason we don't choose death, sleep, is because what dreams may come. We don't know what's waiting for us. Otherwise, he's saying, who would put up with the whips and scorns of time? Who in their right mind would put themselves through all this trouble? Now, he's specifically thinking about the real torment that he's in, thinking through this indecision, which, as you probably know, if you've ever been indecisive on something big, it's agony, okay? He's saying, who would bear the whips and scorn of time? And then he lists some of the whips and scorns, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. What are they? The oppressor's wrong. So living under oppression. Who would choose that? What kind of life does it make? You know, we think of slavery, but believe me, in the Elizabethan age, if you were a commoner, that was a tough time. And the aristocracy and powers that be, they didn't care so much. Not too long before, just over a century, had been the War of the Roses, where masses have been killed in civil war, just for the sake of the aristocracy, the oppressor's wrong. Who would choose to endure the oppressor's wrong? To actually live it, to carry that load. Then he says, the proud man's contumely. So the proud man, the arrogant man, the haughty man who has a position, maybe he's wealthy, maybe he's aristocratic, whatever. Maybe it's a neighbour who's proud, maybe he's proud because of his strength. The contumely is an interesting word. It can mean so many things. It can mean to lie, to be devious, to connive, to scheme, to be wicked, to be insolent. They're the words that you get. Insolence and wickedness, particularly with contumely. He says, who would want to bear the whip of the proud man's contumely? Who would choose to live under the oppression of the proud and the way they treat you? And just having a bad neighbour is bad enough. You know, if you've got someone that's a real thug. Who would choose in life to put up with that? The pain. Wouldn't it be better to sleep? The pangs of despised love. If you've loved someone and you can't let them go, but despised, in other words, the person said no. Or even, you could say unrequited here, maybe you love someone, but you know they're above your station, or you fear that you're not good enough for them, and you see them talking to other people, and they seem to fancy other people, and you're always holding them there, and you would love to have them, but you can't, and the pain that brings in. Romeo's like this at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet over Rosalind. The pain. Who would in their right mind endure all of that? Better to sleep, isn't it? And then he says, the insolence of office. Oh no, the law's delay. So injustice, when things are unjust to you, but the law doesn't put it right. That's another thing we feel. The insolence of office, when someone in power uses it insolently. They don't use it to care for you. They may even use it to oppress you, to work against you or people like you. And then he talks about something that's caused quite a lot of comment. And the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. Curious sentence, confuses quite a lot of people. But he's basically saying that some of us are patient, but the unworthy, those who aren't worthy of patience, now it's not because they're not worthy straight away, but they prove themselves unworthy because you are patient with them and it doesn't alter them. There's no comma after the and, or before the and. So this could be linked very much to the insolence of office. And you patiently wait beneath that overseer. You patiently respect the office of government and people. But they've proved unworthy. And it says that your patient merit, your goodness, is spurned, kicked to one side. You often have the phrase spurned like a dog, to kick a cur. That's what he's talking. So even when you do what is good, it doesn't accomplish anything. Now go back. How did he start that? He says, who would bear the whips and scorns of time and all these things when he himself, it says, might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. Why would you put up with all these horrible things through your entire life, the mortal coil, the round and round rat race of pain, when you could get your quietus, that is your final end. And notice the word quiet fits with sleep no more. Your final end. You could make your own final end with a bare bodkin. A bodkin is a dagger. You may think it's an arrowhead because of the phrase, the bodkin arrow. And it's because of the shape, the blade shape on it, which kicks back and locks itself in the body. It's a dagger, okay? It's an arrow with a dagger on the end, essentially, bodkin arrow. He's just talking bodkin, the blade. Why suffer all these things? Who would suffer all these things when they could just put an end to it with a dagger? He adds to this now, he stacks on images, which is a rhetorical device. He says, who would fardels bear? Burdens. A fardel is a burden, something heavy to carry. To grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Do you get that? And don't you love the lyricism? I really advise you, no matter what you're doing with Shakespeare, with where you're studying it, at what level you're studying it, you have to get this play, understand this section, and then sit and repeat it and repeat it. Believe me, it will run through you. It's not a performance. It will open your eyes to life. Okay? And and our place in it, and the fact that we should be searching for meaning. We intrinsically know there's something worth living for. Hamlet is really asking hard questions and making us not just go along looking at the flash and sparkle of pretty things, which are vapid and transient, but to really see what life is, okay? And its precariousness. So what's he said? He's asked all these questions. Who would suffer the whips and scorns of all these things? And then he says, who would carry the burdens and grunt and sweat under a weary life? To be like a drudge, a slave, weary life, like the old man shuffling off the mortal coil, yeah? Who would pick a life of burden? Who would choose to stay alive, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne means boundary, no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others we know not of. So he's saying, why would we bear all of this except for the fact that we dread what comes next? We don't know the borders, the new land of the afterlife. We may think it could be this or that, it could be permanent non-existence, that could be terrifying in itself. All these things, we simply don't know what's coming, what happens next. Even if we believe it's nothing, it's still, the concept of that is troubling. And it says, and this is where some think there's a mistake, the undiscovered country, death is the undiscovered country, from whose boundaries no traveller returns. Well, some have said travellers do return because he's seen his father, the ghost. But has his father returned? Has he come back from death? No. I must go to sulphurous and tormenting flames, is what he said. So he's not coming back, and we don't know either. No one's come back to tell us what happens at the end. No one's actually been able to escape the dreams that may come perchance. And because of that, it says, it makes us bear the ills we have than to fly to others we know not of. So we'd rather, once we're confronted with the unknown, we'd rather carry on our drudge life and carry those burdens than potentially run off and pick up some other burdens. I remember someone once saying in a talk I once listened to, that if we all we're all in this auditorium, and this speaker said, imagine all of your troubles were in a carrier bag and you carried them around with you. But when you came into this auditorium, you put your carrier bag down on the floor at the lobby, okay? It's all laid out and your names are on it and everything. Now, on the way out, you could choose any bag to run off with. You have to pick up some burdens again, but you could pick anyone's bag. Whose would you pick up? Strangely enough, we'd pick up our own. Do you know why? Because we'd fear what other burdens we could pick up, which might be worse than the ones we've got. That's exactly Shakespeare's point. We carry on life. It's quite pessimistic, and I'm not saying he's true here. I'm not saying Hamlet's absolutely right, neither is he. He's thinking. He's saying, is that why we don't end it all? Because we're scared of what may come. And so we put up. We suffer the slings and arrows. Is it really nobler than taking arms against the sea of trouble? Taking arms against the sea of trouble is foolhardy. You know, it's a forlorn hope, to use the expression, because you can't outdo life's outrageous fortune. But does that mean it's less noble than just resigning to it? And he has us in this position. He tells us a lot about himself, that he simply knows he's resigned. And he realizes that's not noble. You can get that from the flow of what he's saying. He's not noble. But actually it's... And he's not even noble enough to end it all and stick it to outrageous fortune by taking his own life, because he's scared of what might come next. You see how he feels he's a coward and useless and impotent. Amazing, isn't it, what he's got from there? But that's how he feels about himself. Do you see how this is spreading out to other things? And then this shows that this is not just about him, this next bit, because he says, thus conscience does make cowards of us all. When he says conscience here, he's not talking about having a pang of conscience, the ethical problem, moral problems. Conscience just means awareness, consciousness. He's saying, thus, because we are conscious of our thoughts, we are conscious of what dreams may come, or we're conscious that we don't know what dreams may come. He says, it makes us cowards. Because we have an awareness that there could be worse than what we've currently got, we decide not to act after all. And to express it in really good colours, which isn't meant to be a pun, but it fits, he says, and thus the native hue of resolution is cicled o'er with the pale cast of thought. And enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. That is fantastic. So he says we have the native hue of resolution. Sometimes we have ideas in us and we have a resolution. That's what we should do. And it has a native hue. A native hue, natural colour. The natural colours of the world tend to be quite vibrant. They're striking. They're colourful. They're full-bodied. So he's saying the native hue of resolution. When we feel resolve, when you have a decision and you come up with a great idea, how do you feel inside? Passionate, lit up, vibrant, striking, okay? It fills us with energy. And he says, thus, with consciousness, when we become aware of everything and we plan and we think things through, he says that hue, that colour of resolution becomes cicled o'er. Ciclid means to pale, to become one, yeah? Like the moon, to whiten, to diminish, the colour drains from, to blanch. It's over the colour sort of fades, like many washes have gone through it, and with the pale cast of thought. We have a resolution which could be so brilliant, but then we stop and we think, and we think, and we think. And do you know what we think about? What could happen if it went wrong? So for instance, you might have an idea where you could invest your money on the stock market and you could make millions, and you've seen good stocks available and you think that's what I'm going to do, or set up my own business and I'll invest my money to set up my own business and I can dream of myself being a multi-millionaire and living in Tahiti in some paradise island and everything. The native hue of resolution gets you, but it's cicled over by the pale cast of thought, because you start thinking, what happens if I didn't make enough money? What happens if my business didn't work? What happens if it caused me to actually lose my house? What happens if everyone laughed at me? Oh dear, dear, dear. And suddenly the native hue of resolution is cicled. And what does he say? He says, "An enterprises of great pitch and moment." Great pitch, high note. Okay, some say great pith here. But great pitch, the high note, and moment. It's a great moment in time. We talk about turning points in history where someone seized the day, carpe diem. These moments of great pitch and moment. What does he say happens? With this regard, with this thought, overthinking, their currents turn awry. You've got this resolution, this great pitch and moment to take action, and the current should be straight towards action. But when you start thinking it through, the current starts moving wrong. And what does it say? It loses the name of action. In other words, you don't act. Now, Hamlet is saying this about himself. To be or not to be? Should I live or should I end my own life? Is it better for me to just passively sit here and be pelted with outrageous fortune? Is that noble, or is it better taking arms against a sea of trouble and opposing end them? In other words, kill myself with the bare bodkin. But I have got the resolution to do that, and so to sleep, to die, to no more. But the more I think about it, what comes next? Could life be worse? Will I go to hell if I kill myself? Because that was a belief, wasn't it? Suicide, you wouldn't go to heaven. And so the more he thinks, he loses his ability to act. But it also plays on his indecision to take vengeance on his uncle, the king. Because he wants to do that. He actually had a chance earlier where he saw the king praying, but he's like, I'm not going to kill him here. And he gives reasons why. I don't want to send him to heaven when I kill him. I want to damn him to hell. And if I kill him while he's praying, he might go to heaven. That's not accurate, but it's just he started thinking when he had the resolution to act, and it was paled over by the sickly cast of thought. It was sicklied over by the pale cast of thought, He lost his moment. The resolution, the pitch and great moment, the current turned awry and lost the name of action. And this keeps happening to Hamlet, as opposed to when he sees other characters like Fortinbras, who is very resolute, okay? But Hamlet doesn't feel it. Now, that's how he feels. So this is partly about he hasn't got the courage to end his own life. Also, he hasn't got the courage to act either. But it does stretch out to other affairs. It's not just purely about life and death and whether to live or not to live. Because did you notice it says, conscience makes cowards of us all. Now, not everyone worries about whether to live or die, but everyone has great thoughts. But then our conscience, and I don't mean moral, I just mean our awareness, as we take an idea and think it through and perceive the potential problems that we know not of, like the dreams in the sleep, potential problems where we don't succeed with that resolution, that could happen. And if we take action, we step away from where we currently are with the problems we want to resolve. Say you want more money, you've not got a great income, you want to have a better income, but by stepping out of your current area, you don't know what's coming back. And so overthinking, you lose the name of action. Your resolution dies. That this is true, you think of people who have unrequited love. How many times have you talked to someone fancies another person, they keep saying they're going to tell them, but they're too nervous and they never ever tell them. They lose action. And then that person gets another girlfriend or another boyfriend. Now what? And they get married. Now you've lost it. The resolution to just say something was sicklied over with the pale thought. The pale cast of thought. So that's what he's talking about. And like early on, he talks about taking arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. In some respects, you could say Hamlet wouldn't be ending the troubles of outrageous fortune by taking his own life. He'd be caving into them. So in this respect, the line insinuates that this applies to everything. Do we sit and tolerate, just succumb, resign, acquiesce to how life treats us? Or do we have the passion to take up arms, and even though it seems like a sea of trouble, by opposing, we end them. We actually cut through. Moses parted the Red Sea. It's not impossible. Could be what he's saying. But which is more noble? Is it more noble to play it safe and just put up with and become content with what you've got and drudge along? Or is it better to stand up and valiantly fight on against it? That's the question. Again, reminder, is it nobler to live rather than take one's life? Because taking one's life was suicide. That was a sin back then. Okay, so it was ignoble. But Hamlet's inverting that and saying, is it more noble to actually endure misery rather than put an end to it? Do you see how much is in this play, in this soliloquy? This cuts right at the heart. When he said at the beginning, to be or not to be, he's not just saying to exist or not to exist. The message can be taken out. To be. To become what is necessary. To be the valiant warrior who takes things on. To be the explorer. To be the entrepreneur. To go after what you want. Or not to be. To play it safe. To be more content in this place. That is the question. To strike out, to find meaning, that is to be. Or just succumb and say, there's no way you can find meaning. That is the question. Do you see, this is what guides all of us deep down. And that point about meaning is the highest level of to be or not to be. And the point of meaning, of course, if it's all meaningless, would then lead to the very question that Hamlet has now got, which is to exist or not to exist. Then if nothing's going to, what an amazing piece of work. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, as is my penchant, to now read it through now that we know what it's about. And now just fall into the glorious, mellifluous melody that is Shakespeare talking in the most elevated and noble language. The language, as I said, the fugue of reasoning in the mind. Because reasoning is note, a fugue, by the way, is note and counter note. It's weighing up back and forth. Now just listen to it, okay? And I'm not an actor, so I may not read it brilliantly, but just try and fall into the rhythm. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die. To sleep. No more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep. To sleep. Perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. You've got to love Shakespeare. Who talks like that? That's just magnificent. Okay, so there you go. That is the to be or not to be speech, the most famous speech and quoted in all of Shakespeare's works. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please tell me down below what you thought. I have got an idea about making a very limited size group to go through a Shakespeare play with me as a group. Would you be interested in that? It would be paid for because it would take me some time, but I'm thinking it might be 3 or 4 sessions for a small fee, and a group of, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 maximum, where we can go through a Shakespeare play and pull it apart a bit more and enjoy it. Let me know if you would be interested in that. And if you've made it to the end, wait for the end screen to come up, which is probably already on by now. If you want to know more about iambic pentameter, I really recommend you watch my video on iambic pentameter. It will help you appreciate specifically the speeches of Shakespeare and the rest of the plays, but the speeches that are written in iambic pentameter. Why is it so powerful? How do you read it? How do you identify it? How do you let it get into you? You saw an example of how it can help with reading today. You can read it to be or not to be. That is the question. But if you read it if you let the iambic pentameter determine you, you would have to say to be or not to be. That is the question. Okay, which is not the normal way I have been used to reading it. But when you really pull this apart, there's a good argument to be made for stressing is over that. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed it. Please recommend this to other people. If you're a teacher, for instance, by all means, use this in your classroom if you would like to. Or recommend it to other faculty members if you think it could be of use to them. I'd appreciate that. And share it on any sites that you are on. So until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.